Welcome back to the Detailed Depth Podcast with your host Tom and Quinn. This is this is brutal. This is try number 3 on episode 3.
Perfect. Yeah, this is episode 3. Here we are. We're at HD Look Studio here in Fenwick, and today's topic, which I think is an important topic that needs to be discussed, is paint correction and enhancement. So, what do you, in your words, what is paint correction versus enhancement? What do you break it down as?
So yeah, this is kind of where everybody's going to get up in arms, I suppose. All the detailers, anyways. But paint correction for me is you're correcting the paint in the sense that you're removing any defects, right? And it doesn't have to be scratches. It can be any type of correction, really. It can stem from a light polish all the way up to a wet sanding and polish, and essentially you're removing defects. Now, the difference between an enhancement and a paint correction is an enhancement isn't so much to remove defects. It's meant to bring out the luster, bring out the depth and clarity in the paint, but you're still going to have many deeper defects still in the paint.
So you're just trying to make it pop, essentially. Yeah. I think it. So, what do you think the average consumer would want if they came to you?
Me specifically, or just in general?
Well, just in general, like, what do you think the general population thinks? Because everybody uses the term correction,
Yeah.
right? Everyone's correcting your paint, right? So, what, in your words, what do you think that equates to in regards to a client that sees an ad come up on social media says paint correction plus ceramic coating? What do you think they receive it as?
Oh, they receive it as the paint's going to be 100%. And I think I mentioned this I think it was the first podcast where, it's a lot of times it's very difficult to get 100% paint correction because some of the defects are just way too deep, or, they're either potentially in the pigment layer or in the paint layer versus the clear coat layer. And you can't go too far. You can't polish off or sand off way too much, because if you do, you're going to have clear coat failure. You'll have that UV damage, and you'll start seeing that chalky haziness start to show up, sometimes immediately, if not within a year or two, and with the sun beating on it. But I think with the clarity, there needs to be some clarity there where paint correction is, it's all in a sense enhancement, but there's different levels of paint correction. Level 1, 2, 3. There's multi-step, whatever you want to call it, and all it is just basically a more aggressive version of polishing, meaning you are going from a rotary polisher, which is a very aggressive, usually with a wool pad, which cuts into the clear coat a lot faster, and you're working your way up to a finer polish with a softer pad, and with something like a dual action polisher where it's a lot safer for the paint. It really tends to refine out the heavier marring from the rotary polisher.
Yeah, for sure. And I get the biggest question, I'm sure you probably get it too, is people purchase new cars directly from the dealer, and they come into the shop, they come into whatever, and they say, "Oh, it's brand new. Like, I just need ceramic coating. I don't need any correction or enhancement." Now, as we both know, that these things take damage on delivery to it. So, just a quick, takeaway from it. A perfect example of paint correction versus enhancement. I tell people the same thing. Although the vehicle is brand new, there is surface level defect that's going to be on that paint naturally, especially when they PDI'd it, they washed it, did whatever they had to do just in the course. So when we talk about paint enhancement in that specific term, it's not so much removing as much defect, because a correction wouldn't necessarily be worth it, but the enhancement aspect is going to make that pop and shine, and it also gives us a nice clean clear coat layer to apply the ceramic coating to. So I think there's quite a few, and daily drivers that are just full of swirl marks, correction is what's going to push you, into that realm of what you need.
Yeah. Now, when you're, I guess we can jump into this one. When you're ceramic coating, should a detailer polish the vehicle, whether it's a refinement, a enhancement, a full paint correction. What's your take on that?
100%, without a doubt. Because why leave the option for it not to bond to the paint properly? Like, why leave the door open for problems in the future? We do a lot of bikes that we get from a dealer. Well, these bikes are on the showroom, so they're wiping it down with a quick detailer. They're wiping it down with something just to get it to shine and pop to get people's eyes, right? So if you take that and you apply ceramic coating on top of it, ceramic coatings naturally have strippers in it to help it bond to the substrate, right? But I would recommend polishing every time without a doubt, just to remove surface level wax, spray detailer, things like that. And I think it's a huge overstep if a detailer's not. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I agree. You almost need to exfoliate the clear coat before you apply the
Yeah,
ceramic.
great term. Great term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it's so imperative. I mean, otherwise it's just like anything with prep. You're gonna poor prep is gonna have poor output of your product. Right?
100%.
It'll last as long.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about something like, and this is, I guess, another debatable thing, clay barring. So generally, the detailer that is the weekend detailer, call them, they're going to clay bar their vehicles, or they're going to clay bar their friends' vehicles, right? And they're not going to polish it after. What's your take on that? Now, clay barring, if you don't know what that is, it's essentially a piece of clay. Now, they can be a physical piece of clay, or it can be synthetic clay, whether it's in a mitt form, a rag form, a pad form. There's all different things. And what that does is you abrade it against the clear coat, and it removes any embedded contaminants within the paint. So, generally we'll do a full wash, we'll do our chemical decontamination, do all that stuff first. And whatever is left should only be embedded contaminants, which really you can only remove via agitation with a clay bar or clay pad or whatever it may be. So when you're claying all these embedded contaminants out, you're at the same time most likely marring the paint, because all that stuff that's getting caught in that pad or in that clay bar, it's you're rubbing it against the paint, and you're gonna get clay marks. So what's your thought?
I think it comes down to, I would break it down into a subcategory. So if you're a business owner in this industry, I think you're going to claying the vehicle prior to removing defect is going to extend that pad life. Now you can break down whether or not your shop reuses pads or not. We tend to try to use a new pad per vehicle. We kind of work it into the pricing. But if you're reusing pads, I think claying the defect, the big defect, like you said, a clay is to remove things out of the pores of the paint. This is break, fallout, or overspray, things like that. So this is quite large contaminant. If you're not clay barring the vehicle prior to polishing it, that pad is now going to take the brunt of that. And you want your pad to cut whatever option you choose. You want it to cut like a steak knife. Well, having that defect in there is going to make it, it's going to turn into a butter knife eventually. So you're going to go through more pads. The pad longevity is going to lose. I think claying it allows for a quicker turnaround time. I think it gives you a better surface to work with, a better surface to bite into. But with that being said, I think for most people too, if you're looking at an enhancement, is it worth it to clay bar it? Like, because now you're going to defect that paint, and you're here to make it pop. So that's kind of an interesting, that might be a big debating topic. Some people might not agree with us on that. But can you pass me the lighter, actually?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
What are you smoking today? We didn't even go through.
They just jumped into it.
We just jumped right into it.
Taking your suggestions, with great care here. We want to jump into the topics before all the nonsense that we talk about. So
100%.
I'm on actually your Rocky Patel Grand
Oh,
Reserves that you
still chewing
so
through those.
graciously brought me.
Yeah, yeah. I got the I'm doing the minis. I'm doing the minis because we're trying to shorten up these episodes so that people can hear them all. So this will burn for roughly 30 minutes. So
Okay, well, we'll see.
we'll see what happens with it.
See if we go down any rabbit holes today.
But yeah, so I don't know if you're doing an enhancement. What do you think? Is it
So
worth it to clay it? Is it
my theory is I generally if I'm doing an enhancement, I call it a refinement, same thing. I will clay it.
So you're
Because
claying no matter what.
I'm claying if I'm putting a polisher to that vehicle
Yeah.
or coating it. If I'm coating it, I'm doing a correction or a refinement, regardless, depending on what the client would like in their budget. But I am claying that car regardless. If it and I'm using mild clay, like I'm using a soft clay, so it's not going to, generally these cars are pretty good. They're
And for those who don't know, there are different levels of aggressiveness of clay. So that's a valid point that you point that out. So I guess the biggest thing, like, let's talk about common paint issues. When people come in for paint correction or enhancement, what are we talking about? We're talking about swirl marks. We're talking about holograms.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest one is going to be swirl marks. And generally people don't see it until you point it out to them on their own vehicle.
Yes, yes.
And it is what it is. That's our job. That's what our eyes are trained for. We've been doing it for so long. It's, do you see these swirls? No, I don't see it. And then you put a light on it and it's like, oh yeah, man, I never noticed that. So I think like 99% of the time it's going to be some type of swirls or marring from either a brush car wash, or anything, something that abraded against the paint itself.
Yeah, and the thing I see a lot of too, day to day now, that you might agree, is water spot etching. I find now with today's paint, it being so thin and just not put on there like it was back in the late 80s. The thickness just isn't there. But I find the clear coat is really absorbing. Bird droppings, water etching is a huge thing that I see all the time, especially on black cars. So water etching is going to call for a correction rather than enhancement, though some of it will. We can talk about, dieback possibility, which I have a huge story about that way back in the day. So, yeah, but I think anything like that, you're going to kind of be in that correction realm. An enhancement is really meant for, those cars that are driven on the weekends, maybe older cars, the classics and stuff like that. Kind of push them more towards an enhancement, especially if it's an original paint color. But yeah, so defect, common paint stuff, oxidization. I don't really see too much of it, but
Single stage really, and if you want to jump into it, boats, right? Boats, you do more boats than anything, and you'll see a lot of that oxidation on the gel coat.
Yeah.
Carbon fiber hoods. Or
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, especially if it's like a cheaper carbon fiber, kind of has a hard time. We actually just went and quoted a boat today, and it's 5 years old, and all the black on it's white. It's all chalky, and people don't understand why. And I did a quick explanation that gel coat specifically has it's so porous, right?
Yeah.
But the more porous it is, it hides scratches better. It hides defect better. They put it on boats. It's extremely durable. One of the downsides to that is it's going to oxidize a lot faster. So oxidization with boats it's just part of the game. That's why waxing a boat, sealing a boat, ceramic coating a boat is so important. Almost as important as really cutting. You want to talk about correction versus enhancement with boats. You're talking wet sanding, because if you don't chew off that oxidization, which is typically pretty deep, it's probably half a mil to a mil of oxidization typically on a boat. It's just going to come back again within a couple weeks out in the sun, depending on the gel coat and the make and model of the boat. But typically that's what we found. So cutting into that paint, correcting that gel coat, I should say, not paint, is really going to give you that long lasting result. So with boats, it's extremely dicey. It's not like automotive paint.
Yeah. And I guess while we're on the topic of paints, I think people may not understand really what the thickness of paint, like we can get into the topic of paint gauges.
Yeah, like
Now,
how do you assess? Like, let's talk about assessing paint.
yeah.
As a detailer, car comes into your shop. What are you doing to plan your attack to assess and correct or enhance that paint? What do you? And I think the assessment will, tell you which one you can do in some cases.
Yeah. So first things first is the wash would be the initial thing, because you can't really tell much when the car is dirty. From that point, I'll pick a spot, and I mean, if we're both kind of, I mean, if the owner and I are kind of like, well, I don't know if it's single stage paint or if it's base clear, then we'll do a test spot. I'll just put a little bit of light polish on a brag, rub a small area, on the bottom somewhere, and see if there's pigmentation on my rag, it means it's a single stage paint. So you have to kind of you have to be more cognizant about things like edges and stuff like that. If there's no pigmentation, we know, okay, it's a base clear. We got a little bit more, I don't know, if leniency, I guess. I like to think anyway, especially around edges. From that point, I'll go around and I'll do an actual paint depth report. So, I mean, you've got the same gauge as I do, I believe. And we'll actually go around the whole vehicle. And any vehicle that will get a paint correction through us, we give a report of the paint. Now, most people just put in their email and toss it. But what it's supposed to do is indicate whether, number one, has there ever been any paint work done on this car, right? It'll tell you a couple things. So it'll tell you if there's a second layer of paint. It'll tell you if there's maybe a thin or thick layer of Bondo. It'll tell you a few different things.
And for those who don't know, quick, a paint depth gauge, how it reads is the surface of the substrate. The substrate meaning the body panel. It shoots till it hits the ferrous, sometimes non-ferrous, I guess, metal underneath, and that distance is what measures. And then properly trained detailer can be able to then break down each increment of measurement and give them a rough idea how much clear, how much base, how much primer, whatever's on there. So that's a paint depth is giving you a distance you can travel per se when correcting paint.
Yeah. So once we kind of figure out or we decide on what the report says and kind of, okay, how are we going to deal with this? Then we'll come up with a plan of attack. There's maybe some areas where it's just like it's an unknown. If the car was repainted, if the car's factory, fine, we'll polish it, but we're not going heavy on it because of the fact that it's generally a lot less paint and a lot less clear coat on the actual panels versus a car from 20-25 years ago when there was 8+ mils of coating. Now there's 4 to 6 maybe. I think lower than that, but.
And in my opinion, going back to that, choosing the right detailer, choosing a professional versus, the weekend kind of warrior thing, especially when you're polishing paint. A paint depth gauge is a complete non-negotiable with any polishing job on a vehicle with a professional. Immediately non-negotiable. I've had Ford Mustangs come in brand new. We're talking 1.8 mils. Like, not a lot going on. That's a tri-coat, with the metallic flake in it. So that's a
blow through the mid coat or the clear coat into the mid coat on one of those.
Yeah, and it's so people that aren't utilizing paint depth gauges, it's really you're going into a situation with a valuable asset blind, really. So it's a total non-negotiable when going through that process, and every detailer, every person should be able to, they might not say it to you, but you should be able to go back to them and say, hey, can I get my paint report on that before and after?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just going to say after would be a good one because it'll give you a good baseline as to how much clear coat was removed. When it comes to things like wet sanding, that's another slippery slope because you should never really wet sand factory.
So dangerous.
It's unless you know what you're doing and you understand the way it's laid. I probably would step away from that. If a vehicle's been painted and it's got 3, 4, 5 coats of clear on it, nice and thick, you've got loads of room in there to sand it and you can start 800 grit and move your way up.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's another thing too.
I think too on factory paint, like a lot of the crazy people, because there are people out there that do it. The so-called, true corrections. Everything needs to be completely flat. A lot of the times on factory paint, these guys are using Trizac 3M. Like it's not even really a sanding paper. It's like almost like a finish to do the majority of that heavy lifting. Now we're nerding out on specifics of doing a specific process, but for the guys who know what we're talking about, um, they're not even factory paint. They're not really going hard with the 2000s and stuff like that. You could probably get away with it, I would assume, depending. But another interesting thing is a professional detailer should be in talks with that painter, especially if you're going to that wet sand. I mean, we had that job with Racket Ralph, and you wet sanded that Ford panel van.
Yeah.
It was a 36, I think it was.
Yeah.
And you were luckily able to go back and find the painter, and he was able to give you some sort of insight. Otherwise, I believe with that project, you were almost telling him this is as flat as it's going to get without knowing anything more.
Yeah.
And that's that's that integrity thing that we keep bringing up in every episode. So it's so important. And that's even with a paint depth gauge no, it was fiberglass. You couldn't even shoot it.
No, there's some panels. Not everything was fiberglass, I don't think.
No?
No, because I
I know it
remember
had
being
that.
able to shoot it, but they were such high readings that the paint gauge was like 90 mils in areas, and it's like, oh man, is that bond? Like it says that there's a thick layer of Bondo there, but it could be no Bondo. It could just be a shit ton of paint and clear. So that's why it's very important if you're going to be doing, if you have a custom vehicle and you're taking it somewhere to get wet sanded and polished, give them some information, how many coats of clear, that'll give the detailer, if they know what they're doing, a good indication or a good idea of how much they can take off.
Yeah.
Of.
Yeah, all imperative. I mean, and when assessing paint condition, you mentioned it earlier. So you have the paint depth gauge, which is a non-negotiable in my opinion.
Yep.
The second thing is, what are some lighting tricks that we can utilize or that we do utilize as detailers to expose? Because a lot of the time people don't even know, these love marks, these swirl marks are in there. So what are some lighting techniques that we employ to bring those to people's attention, because most people don't really quite understand. And then I think we can talk a little bit on how light on paint works and why a scratch appears. But what are some lighting techniques, that you use? Because everything in the sun looks completely different than it does, under a spotlight.
So if you look at the situation where your car's out in the sun, well, you got to kind of think of it as the sun itself is flooding all those scratches, right? So they're not as noticeable as, for instance, when you bring it to the shop here, we'll generally try to throw a spotlight on it. And the best way to do it is you shut off all the lights and have a single point of light. And I mean, you're supposed to have it, scientifically, it's 45 degrees to where you're looking. That's how you get the light to refract,
Yeah.
the best it can, or the most through that particular scratch, and it'll show up on
To show you that 4K. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So I mean, that's a quick trick, is like literally just throwing a spotlight on it. Generally when you paint correct, you should be doing that. You kind of work in a darker scenario. And then the other thing too is depending on the color of the car, you could be a black car, and you can use a yellow or a white light. But if you're working on a white or silver car, light colored car, a white light will generally wash out any defects. So it's going to kind of give you not a true reading, visual reading. So you want to kind of jump down into like maybe a 3000, 3500 Kelvin, a more yellow light, which will show up a little bit better on a white or silver vehicle.
Hologram or halo, what are the hexagon light detailers? We're talking to you. It's it goes back to that thing. But like I said, it doesn't look good on social media, so we can understand it for the finishing photos. But when you're working, the workability of those lights is completely useless, especially if you don't, like I noticed in your studio, You got different lighting settings that you can go through. You can go warm, you can go bright, you can really do it. Any specific shop should have a functionality before an aesthetic. So the hexagon lights, they look modern, it looks nouveau, it looks nice, but realistically, when you're trying to expose proper defect and really do a true correction and or enhancement, the lighting thing is so overlooked. Um, with regards to that, and the next thing too, I think is different when correcting paint. A lot of people, a lot of new detailers aren't even gonna know what this is, but a rotary polisher versus a DA versus a heavy cut compound versus a polish versus a foam pad versus a super soft foam pad. I think it's important that we talk for a minute, just kind of very bird's eye view, because that can be an episode just in of itself is just pads. So we'll just touch on the topics. But what's a rotary polisher for those who don't know? Both consumer and possibly detailers, because a lot of people get freaked out with rotaries. So what's the difference between a rotary versus a DA? So that people, when they go into a shop, they see work happening.
Yeah.
What are they looking at?
So with a rotary, now generally rotary, I mean, any newer detailer, I don't think they tend to jump into that world. They usually go with a dual action. But a rotary rotary machine or polisher is a single axis, meaning that pad is spinning in a circle, and generally you'll use it with a wool pad or a heavy cutting wool pad. So, in like a 2-step or 3-step paint correction, you would use that as your first step, and it's doing the most aggressive work. So again, we can get into the whole nitty gritty of what compounds and what pads to use and so on, because there's some more abrasive, some less abrasive, and so on. So the rotary it does a lot of the heavy work. It generates heat, but you got to know kind of what limits to push it to, right? In terms of panel temperature, like you can overheat the paint and so on.
You can swell the paint. Yep.
When it comes to a dual action or a DA, there's two different types. There's the free spinning, and then there's the gear driven. So the free spinning is just, you've got a machine that it kind of everything spins on two axes. So you've got the pad rotating on a gyro, and then you've got the pad itself spinning as well. And the gear driven versus a free spin, the difference is that a gear driven actually pushes the pad in a circle versus the free spinning, which it kind of just goes based on friction. So the more friction you apply or the more speed you apply, the more it turns, and vice versa. So depending on what panel.
Yeah.
The DA method is much safer. However, it does take a little bit longer to remove heavier defects. The caveat to that is the longer you use it, the way more heat you're generating. You're spoiling your pad. You're spoiling the compound that's on the car. So a lot of technical stuff. A rotary, I think that should be the very first tool that any detailer picks up. To test. So I go to the junkyard, get a panel and test it out with a rotary. Understand what it does.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's very similar, for those who are listening that aren't really know what it is we're talking about in tools. It's like a chef, trying to cook. It's like an iron pan versus, a new non-stick. It's kind of like an iron. It's gonna sear it a lot easier. It's gonna get the heat into it a lot quicker. But if it's too hot, it burns. It's finicky, right? So with a rotary, you're doing a lot of correction right off the hop. It's gonna save you time. So if you're a production-based shop with a high quality of output, most of those guys are going to be running rotaries as their initial step, and then they're going to be refining with the DA afterwards to remove any, buffer trails or holograms that could come from that step. So you're taking so much clear off in that initial step, and that paint is going to have its own form of correction defect, I guess we could call it. Buffer trails. I mean, there's guys that are going to argue and say, well, if you're good with a rotary, it won't have any. You can kind of walk them out of the panel or whatever. But realistically, a production-based shop today, they're probably going to have them after that first rotary step and then finish up with a DA. But a DA, like you said, it's going to take you a little bit longer, but it's much safer, especially around the edges. It's an easier tool to use in that sense. So you're sacrificing time, but you're also going to cost you more money for those who run a business, because you're going to go through pads. The heat's going to build up a lot quicker. You have to, make sure not to overwork the compound, though, in my opinion, from what I've seen with people, is not enough people work the compound enough with DAs, I find. But
Yeah, they get impatient, right?
yeah, yeah. So there's pros and cons to it, with using a specific tool for a specific service that you're doing to do. Would you use a rotary for an enhancement?
I mean, you could. If you're really good with a rotary, you can get a better shine out of a rotary than you can with a DA if you're really good with it. Your perfect pad and polish combo, you can make that panel shine with no swirls, no halos, no nothing, right?
Like a magician. Yeah.
Magician, yeah.
Yeah. That's your nickname, I think, is the magician.
I don't know. I don't think so.
You're a magician in my eyes. I've seen that. I've seen your wet sand work. It's really, it's impeccable. But so going on to that, like, must have stuff that you need to go along with these tools. You're using these tools. You're using these high quality compounds and polishes. I know we're not naming brands on here just yet, but we each have brands that we like to use, and from brand to brand, it's so different, the finish that you get from different brands. There's with wool, it's a closed loop application versus with boats. There's so much knowledge and stuff that's there, but the most important thing, probably amongst everything, is what are you wiping that compound off with? What kind of microfibers are you using? Are you using, cheap polyester? Are you spending $30 a rag, for the whatever 60 million GSM, nice thick pile microfiber? So it's just as important to have, because you have this perfect surface. What are you wiping it with? What's your mansplaining 2-minute explanation of microfibers?
So microfibers, they are measured by GSM, which means grams per square meter, which essentially means the higher the GSM, the more grams per square meter, i.e., the more the thicker the more plush it could be. So with a paint correction or refinement, I'll generally jump to like a 320 GSM. Nothing, I don't like using the big 500s unless it's like a final white down before. But the 320 I find to be a good medium, where it doesn't gum up the fibers. Like if you have a really long fiber, like a 500 or 550 GSM cloth, wiping off compound, it gets really thick. Like it gets really kind of messy.
It's like a pillow at 500 GSM.
It is, yeah.
That's nice.
They're expensive too. Like,
oh yeah, so
we generally would use for that. But that's it. And I think the other important thing too is using like alcohol or like a panel wipe or something.
Yeah.
Like that to help aid removing that compound or the polish off the panel.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think it's definitely an overlooked aspect for sure. What's your opinion on high GSM rags with removing ceramic coatings? Because I know with me, whenever I ceramic coat a car, those rags are thrown out right afterwards. We don't wash them. We don't do anything like that. So in your opinion, you're spending, for the business guys out there, you're spending big money on these microfibers just to throw them away. What do you think?
240 GSM or 280 GSM, I think the same ones that I use to pull the compound off. The reason for that is the longer hair ones, the higher GSM, is you're going to get threads stuck somewhere as you're leveling the coating. You're going to get those little pieces of microfiber stuck in the pad. Plus they get saturated. So it's just, I may use it actually just for like an insurance wipe. So I'll generally use 2 towels to level, but then I may, if I'm having really like huge issues with humidity or wherever, I may go back over it with a 500 or something similar to
as like a final wipe.
Final insurance wipe.
Yeah, insurance wipe. Yeah, and going back to just it as a whole, what are some downsides? I think we should talk about that. When you go to these guys, let's say you go to a guy that has a rotary or a DA even, who's not really well versed, hasn't been well trained. What's some of the damage that can be done going to somebody who doesn't quite know what they're doing? Off the top of my head, you have burn through. Obviously. Yeah. So that's huge.
I mean, the burn through is probably going to be the most common. Another one would be, your edge work. So if they're running that pad, whether it's a rotary or DA on an edge, I mean, it'll take no time to blow through the paint, because that's where I'm talking on an edge where, you have a body line, and the clear coat is the thinnest right on the tip of that body line. And when they're running that polisher back and forth, they're thinning that out so much that they will just slice right through that clear coat, right through the pigment, right into the primer sometimes. On the other end is they may not be working, like you said, the compound or the polish enough to be able to remove the defects that they want to remove. So the car's going to look shiny, but it's still going to have some defects in it.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, which goes back to the importance of that decontamination stage. A lot of people, like we said, do you decontaminate? Do you clay bar? Do you do this? Do you do that? We always recommend that happens, and if you're using a detailer, we always recommend that you make that a point to them that you want to get it clay barred, you want to get it decontaminated, because that can come back to bite them during those correction stages. And I know something with me too. I've seen it before when, going to various places, especially with the DA people, they're trying to correct so aggressively that compound almost burns its way into the clear coat. And I always find it typically always happens on the Chevy Black, especially like that '06. Yeah, the GM Black is terrible. And you get the cloudiness to it, right?
Yeah.
So they're so aggressive trying to remove the defect that they overlook that finish. And that finish all of a sudden then becomes a defect in and of itself. So you're kind of chasing your tail in a circle. So it's super overlooked, but I think one of the biggest takeaways that you can get, from all of this as a whole is technique. It's how you approach it, whether you're doing a correction versus an enhancement, the type of tooling that you're going to choose to use. Are you going to venture into that rotary realm? Are you going to, try picking up one of these tools and save yourself, like, I don't know, what would you say, hours? I would say hours probably on a correction with a rotary versus a DA. Saving, yeah.
Oh yeah, depending on how much you actually want to, or how much was agreed on and budget and stuff like that with the client. But you'd be saving a ton, not only in time, but you'd be saving a ton in pads and compound and everything, right? It's really a niche thing, I find now. Like, I mean, you go back 30 years, 40 years, like nobody used a DA. It was, I mean, generally you would use a rotary, and they would start and finish with a rotary.
So that's that old school body guys.
That's all it is, man. And back in the day, they did it really well. Now body shops nowadays, I mean, who knows how to use a rotary and who doesn't. Yeah, because you'll get a job that just came from the body shop, and you know exactly what was done.
Yeah, and you know who did it. Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah. It's and you see that a lot, especially with the body shops. So I think for the listeners, the biggest thing is maybe this weekend. When the sun's out, hopefully it's raining right now. The spring's been long, but go out there, assess your own paint, put it in the sun, kind of see what jumps out at you, and if you are seeing these love marks, we call them, swirls and stuff like that, whether you're going to attempt it yourself or not, whether you're going to call a local professional to kind of get in there and get these things done, especially after the winter time, go out there, have a look at your paint, see where you fall, and go from there. And the first place of knowing you need a service done is assessing your paint yourself. So.
Yeah, and that goes for anybody who's actually picking up a new car too. Like, very important. Don't let the dealerships tell you that that's how it comes, that's how you get it. No, you paid big money likely for this vehicle. That paint should be freaking spotless.
Yeah, and I think
be love marks. It shouldn't be any crazy stuff. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, and the dealership thing, I think in a future episode we have we know a few owners that may want to come jump on the podcast and give us their version of that, because I know in their business model sometimes that doesn't work. There's not a lot of upsell on these cars for them. So it'd be awesome to get their opinion on it. So I think in the upcoming episodes, that's what we're going to get.
Yeah.
Maybe on the next episode, I think we talk more about technique and product and kind of how it all stems from it. And I think people that are interested in that, you can find that on the next episode coming up. But I think all in all, we hit on some pretty main topic points, and for people who don't quite know, I think it was a quick kind of.
I got one more point right.
Oh, he's got one more. He's coming in.
That's
coming in. Give it to me.
Let's talk. Well, I mean, let's not talk, but I mean, I want to point out something. Pricing on something like paint correction.
Ooh.
It is all over the place.
Good one. Yeah.
And I just want to bring it up, the fact that, you know, you've got generally a detailer for, like, you know, let's say a standard sedan. I mean, we'll use maybe 6 pads, and that's just to help us be more efficient. And it allows us to get a more even finish across the entire vehicle.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, you can clean your pads. Like if you're a detailer, you can clean your pads out between every panel or every pass, however you want to do it. I just found it's about 25 to 30 bucks a pad now.
Yeah, they're expensive.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's you're hundreds of dollars
Just in pads. Yeah.
just in pads.
I think for a proper correction, you're probably $250, $300 just in pads.
If you're doing a multi-step,
If you're doing the multi-steps, yeah.
that take, you know, we have to take that into consideration. Do we use pads again? Well, after a good cleaning, we have to assess them, you know, because not all pads are going to work. I mean, once you use them once, they're not going to be as efficient the next time, right? So you got to kind of understand where to use them after.
And that's that, you know, that's that $299, guys. We're calling you out on the paint correction for $200, you know, $199 paint correction. Knowing the back end of it, just think about how badly they're molesting that paint for $199. You're getting the same pad that they just did, you know, Jim's 98 Toyota Corolla with. So, you know, you have to keep these things in mind. Everything costs money.
Yeah. Ask them, if you go to a detailer, if you go to a shop and they're going to do a paint correction, ask them to see their polishers and their pads.
Oh, you want them to go in on the kid, eh? I'm pretty sure their heart would stop if you did that, but, you know,
This is it. We were trying to open eyes, right, to this.
yeah.
Kind of how people are getting away with it. You know, you've got, there's your difference in why people are charging what they charge, you know, $500, $600, $700 for a paint correction, depending on the stage or vehicle, versus the guys who were ripping them out at $1.99.
Yeah. And knowing the back end, like I said, you can only imagine what's going on for $1.99, and it's probably a DA smother job. They're going to swell that paint up, but, you know, knowing the tools is going to help you a lot, and you can vet right off the hop. You can vet a detailing and just say, are you correcting my car with a DA or a rotary? That alone is going to send them into a tailspin. So, you know, ask the questions, guys. Go out there, ask the questions, do your research, you know, whether it's listening to this podcast, anybody's podcast, YouTube, whatever you choose to do the back end knowledge so that you can go in here, because once again, and I'm going to keep reiterating it every time we go, these people are touching the second biggest investment you make. This is your $1,200 a month payment, sometimes more. Don't trust it with a $199, you know, burner crew.
Yeah.
It's there's so much to it. So
awesome, man. On that note, I think we'll close it out.
Yeah.
Thank you again for listening at the Detailed Depth Podcast.
Yeah, give it a like and hit that bell, or what do they say on the YouTube?
I'll subscribe
and hit that bell.
Follow
on Spotify, whatever. Give us
whatever you want. Yeah, we're on Spotify and YouTube.
Yeah.
So again, we're just trying to get the hang of this, and we are trying to push these episodes out every Wednesday at 7 p.m. So hopefully Thursday morning on your commute to work, you got something to listen to.
And we appreciate you guys listening to it. It takes a lot of back end stuff to make this happen. So
we're gonna try to make these episodes a bit shorter too.
Yeah, we're gonna get them a little more clean and concise. So let us know in the comments or shoot us a DM. I know we've had people, tell us what you think about it, and tell us if you're gaining knowledge from it. And yeah, I guess we'll see you on the next episode, folks.
Great, thank you guys.
Ciao.